Welcome to Can Fire Be a Forest Friend at Calaveras Big Tree State Park. My name is Lily. But before we get into all of that, and as you all are trickling in, I wanted to share with you all the California State Parks Earth Week logo winners. You can see it on my screen now. We have a lovely design by Zoe, who got first place. Then we also have a tie for second place, and we have our third place as well. So congratulations to those who won. And also to all of you submitted. I heard that there were hundreds of submissions this year, which is awesome to hear about. If you didn't get a chance to submit, this is pretty much a yearly thing. So kind of stay tuned for the next time. So I'll keep this up for a little bit as you all are logging on, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes so we can make sure everyone is here. So also another quick note, I'm seeing some reactions. That's awesome. Feel free to use the reaction buttons however you want during this program. If you don't know where your reaction buttons are, it might be on the bottom part of your screen. It might be a little dot, dot, dot on the side. It might be at the top. I've learned that every single device displays Zoom Zip differently, which is a little hard to handle. But go ahead, give me some reactions. Those are fun for me to see. Okay, we'll start in 1 minute. We'll start at 11:03. Hopefully that point everyone's logged in okay. You're set up just fine. You can hear me, all that good stuff. And for those of you who are just logged in, we're just doing a quick congratulations to the California State Parks Earth Week logo winners, and you can see their lovely designs on the screen. Okay, it's 11:03 according to my clock, so let's officially get started with the program. But congratulations again to the logo winners. So again, welcome everyone to Calaveras Big Trees State Park. My name is Lily. You can call me Ms. Lily. I do also respond to Ranger Lily. Technically, I'm what's called an interpreter here at California State Parks. Doesn't necessarily mean that I speak multiple languages, but it does mean that I speak for the trees. I am a Lorax of sorts. I interpret what's going on at the park and can deliver that information to you guys in hopefully interesting, maybe fun kind of way. Today, we're going to be talking all about fire here. And I do want to do a quick test of sorts. I like to use polls. However, I have learned along the way that polls don't always work in some classrooms. They don't always work in some homes. So I'm going to launch a poll here just to see if it works okay. So please vote if you can. If I realize majority of you cannot vote, then we'll just not use polls this time around, and that is fine. So here's the poll. Just launched it. The question is, have you ever been to Calaveras Big Trees State Park? So we have an option of yep, nope, maybe, or virtually. And if you are on YouTube, if you're watching this in the live stream, unfortunately, you can't access this poll. So you can kind of think to yourself what you would say if you could vote in this poll. And you can put it in the chat if that's available to you. Otherwise, please vote in this poll. I'll give you another about 30 seconds or so to vote. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm ending the poll. Definitely most of you could not vote, so that's good for me to know. We won't be using polls again, but I'll still share the results. So we have a majority who have never been here before, so welcome. Some of you have been here, so welcome back. Some of you aren't certain, totally get it. I could not list every place I visited, especially if I visited there when I was like 6. That's too hard to do. And some of you have been here virtually. So if that's the case, welcome back. Maybe you've seen me before, maybe you saw somebody else, but happy to see you all again. So the way this program's going to go, this will be just about 45 minutes of me kind of talking at you, you learning with me, you experiencing things with me, but I will have time at the end for a Q&A. So you might have seen the Q&A option. I already see there's some questions in there. I will be getting to that at the very end of the program. That way, for those of you who maybe aren't interested, can't kind of make it, you can leave right at that 11:45 mark or roughly around then, depending on when I'm done. And then I'll linger for the next 10 minutes or so to answer any questions you may have. So kind of just keep that in mind. So to start off, let me introduce you to Calaveras big trees, because as I just saw, a bunch of you have never been here before. So I want you all please to start driving, pretend to start driving, and then keep driving, keep driving, keep driving, because you're on your way to the park, and maybe you're using something like Google Maps to get over here. So on Google Maps, I got us completely zoomed in at the visitor center. The visitor center is actually across from this building right here. I am right next to the visitor center. So maybe if you know this area, you can kind of recognize this part of the map, but I'm going to zoom out some more. You can see Arnold further down the highway there. Technically, our address is in Arnold. Not a very well-known town, but maybe you've heard of it before. Zooming out some more, we have Bear Valley in the upper right corner. Pretty famous place for skiing. Zooming out even more, now we're getting Sacramento, San Francisco, those big names. Even more, and a little bit more, and we have the whole state of California in here. So depending on where you are, it might be a pretty long drive. I know San Diego is like 8, 9 hours to get here. Maybe you live pretty close by. Maybe you're in San Francisco, which is like 3 hours drive. We're roughly in the middle of the state. And you might also notice, I'm going to zoom back in just a tad, that we're not super close, but relatively near the border of Nevada. And that's key because this park was made way back in 1931 specifically to protect giant sequoias. Pretty well-known tree. We'll be talking a lot about giant sequoias today when we're talking about fire in this forest. One of the reasons why giant sequoias are so special is because they are an incredibly picky tree. Now I'm seeing you all using reactions, which is awesome. So I want you to either raise your hand in your classroom or give me a laughing, crying face emoji if you're picky about something. Who here is picky about something? If you can't do the reaction buttons, just raise your hand, look around. Otherwise, I want to see your reactions. Personally, I'm seeing a steady stream of laughing, crying face emojis. Me too, for the record. I'm very picky about many things. Giant sequoias are picky about their habitat. If you're trying to find a giant sequoia, you have to first stay in California. But more specifically, you have to be in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Those mountains are what helps create this border with Nevada. Second, you can't go too high up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. You got to go between about 4,000 and 8,000 feet elevation. So I'm not the tippy most top. I don't still have snow surrounding me, although honestly, a couple years ago, I did still have snow surrounding me. But we did have a lot of snow this winter. And if you go higher up, there'd be even more snow. Right now, I'm at about 5,000 feet, kind of a midpoint. Then finally, lastly, step 3, you have to stick to the western side of the Sierra Nevada mountains. You have to be on the side over here versus basically like right over there. So all that being said, if you're a giant sequoia in your natural habitat, you are found in roughly this squiggle right here. That's it though. In the whole world, they're only found in that little strip, at least naturally. Some people have taken giant sequoias and planted them elsewhere. That is true. So looking at the squiggle here, right? Of course, we have Calaveras big trees where I am right now. This is a state park, but we also have some national protected areas. Technically, there's some giant sequoias in Tahoe National Forest. Yosemite National Park also protects giant sequoias. I know Sierra National Forest has some. Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks and Sequoia National Forest, literally in the names. All these different kinds of places, state parks, federal parks, that includes national parks and national forests, they all protect these trees. Because they're so picky, they're pretty rare. There's only about 60,000 or so adult mature giant sequoias, not a lot of them. But if I'm honest, the main reason why giant sequoias are so protected and why this park exists to protect them is because they are the biggest tree ever, period. Now, if we're talking about size, I like to break this down into two ways. I like to think about the width and the height. That gives you the overall volume. If y'all are into geometry, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. So let's just do some quick math. I want you in your classrooms, or if you're by yourself, to kind of just do it in your head, but in your classrooms, you can kind of discuss with each other, think of the answer. Starting with the width, my wingspan is about 5 feet. Let me get myself better in the frame here, glowing in the sun right now. The widest giant sequoia right now is about 40 feet across. So do some quick math in your head to kind of talk about it with the person next to you. How many me would it take to stretch across a 40-foot tree with my 5-foot wingspan? I'm hoping a bunch of you did some quick math there and said 8. It would take 8 of me to stretch across the very widest giant sequoia. I mean, I can step back a little bit here, but I'm going to get into these trees. I mean, that would be, let's see. So let me go over here. So we have 1, like 2, 3, 4, and now I'm going off camera. It would absolutely overwhelm this screen for the very biggest, widest giant sequoia. Pretty impressive. We will be seeing a giant sequoia later today, I promise. It's not as wide as that, but imagine a tree completely filling this whole screen. Now we have to think about those two factors, right? So we have the width, now we need to think about the height. I have a video here going up to one of our tallest giant sequoias in the park. Now, one quick note, unfortunately, Zoom is kind of finicky with sharing videos. So there's a fair likelihood this video will be a little laggy for you. I do apologize for that. This is on YouTube if you want to check it out later, not super laggy. Let's slide to the top of one of our tallest giant sequoias. Okay, hopefully y'all made it to the top. Again, I apologize if that was a bit laggy for you. But you can see that was a full minute and 10 seconds climbing all the way to the top of one of our tallest giant sequoias. This one's about 250 feet tall. Very tallest giant sequoia is actually 314 feet tall. But that's not the average. You can think about how like basketball players are super duper tall, way taller than everybody else. Most giant sequoias are more in the 250 range, not so much that 300 range. That's like the basketball players of the giant sequoias. But that still towers over all of the other trees in the forest the giant sequoias live in. Some of those trees are giant sequoias, most of them are something else. Now, when this park was created, it wasn't like we just protected every single giant sequoia and said, forget it for the whole forest. We protected everything. And in doing so, we also need to figure out how everything interacts with each other. What exactly is going on here? And one of the biggest questions we had is thinking about fire. That's kind of the central question of this program. Is fire a friend or foe? Both? Neither? It's a little tricky to figure out. So let's first think about what is fire anyway. And I actually am situated in a pretty nice spot to talk about fire. So if you all want, if you're feeling a little antsy, you can go ahead and stand up and kind of march in place with me as we walk into the campfire center. If you're ever here in the summertime, we do campfire programs on Friday through Monday. So you can come hang out by the campfire, learn about something fun, do some songs and games and all that. Okay, I'm going to set us up in the shade so you don't have too much of a glare, hopefully. All right, people are marching in place with me. You can go ahead and take a seat again. We're going to be, oop, nope, that is pretty bad glare. Let me readjust us a little bit. We're going to be talking about fire. We'll have this lovely stage behind me here. So, fire overall. We got to think nice and big and broad. Overall, fire is the chemical reaction of oxygen and fuel to produce light and heat. Okay, so we have a reaction, produce light and heat. Kind of makes sense. It does need oxygen and fuel. So I want you all please to give me a thumbs up emoji if you are currently breathing okay. Who here is breathing all right? You can kind of raise your hands if you're in your classroom. Everyone breathing okay? Thumbs up emoji? Good. I'd be a little worried if I didn't see a bunch of thumbs up emojis right now. That means we have lots of oxygen around. For me, I'm breathing just fine. Lots of oxygen around. Makes sense. I'm absolutely surrounded by trees right now. Now I want you to look around the room. For me, I'm just looking around like this wooden stage I'm right by, right? And I want you to give me a ooh, like the wow emoji if you're surrounded by something that could be considered fuel, something that could be flammable. Give me that like surprise face emoji. All righty. Excellent. So now I want you to give me a clap emoji. Who here is currently on fire? I'm hoping to see no clapping emojis at this point, because if you are on fire, you should not be watching this program. You should go get some help. But that's the thing, right? We said that fire needs oxygen and fuel. It's a reaction that makes those two ingredients turn into flames. But we're surrounded by oxygen and fuel, and neither of us are on fire, hopefully. Not entirely sure of everyone's situation. So that means fire needs something else to get started. It doesn't just spontaneously combust. You might have heard about that in like sci-fi movies. That doesn't usually happen for good reason, because fire needs something called a catalyst. It needs something to get the reaction going. So I want everyone please to put your hands together and start rubbing them really fast. Hopefully, at this point, it's starting to feel pretty warm. I know for me, getting so warm, I kind of want to stop because it's a pretty warm day right now. Fire needs heat to get started. And kind of a famous example of heat is friction, like you rubbing your two hands together. You think about how people might rub two sticks together or scrape two rocks together to get friction, to get heat to start a fire. Same idea. So we think when we, like scientists, we, and that includes you, think about fire, we often use something called the fire triangle. So we have oxygen and we have fuel, like we just talked about, but we also need heat to get a fire started. These three ingredients are absolutely key. So that also means if you tweak any of those three ingredients, the fire is going to change. If you remove one of them entirely, the fire is going to go out. So what I want you to do now, I want you to turn the person next to you, or if you're in a group, you can kind of talk in a group. If you're by yourself, you can kind of just think to yourself, or you can write it down if you have paper and pencil, or paper and pen. We're not picky here. And I want you to think about how you've put out a fire, or maybe how you've seen someone put out a fire. Could be on TV. But more importantly, think about why did it work? Why did that method of putting out a fire work, thinking about this fire triangle? So I'm going to give a very quick example. I feel like most of us have blown out a candle before, potentially on your birthday. When you push out your breath, you are breathing out mostly carbon dioxide. We breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. So that means you are pushing away the rest of the air, replacing it with mostly carbon dioxide, so the candle does not have any more oxygen to use. Okay? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to talk to the person next to you or in your groups or think to yourself, what do you do to put out a fire and why did it work? Go. And I got my watch timer here, so I'll keep track of time for y'all. Okay, we're about halfway through. Make sure the other members of your group or your partner has also shared. All right, I'm putting up my watch to the screen for that last minute. Make sure you've discussed everything you wanted to discuss. Thirty seconds. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Hopefully you had a good discussion. Here's some things I was thinking about because I'm by myself. So I just had to think to myself, like maybe some of you were doing. I'm okay though. I'm not too lonely. I promise. I was thinking about water. Give me a celebratory reaction. Who here, or raise your hands if you're in your classroom, who here was thinking about water? Celebratory reaction, the little like, exploding confetti horn thing. Yeah, I'm seeing a few of those for you thinking about water. Water is what I like to call a twofer to get rid of fire. It can get rid of both oxygen and heat. Because think about it. Water, you toss it on a fire, it literally drowns the flames. It can't breathe anymore. So, no more oxygen. Water also is a heck of a lot colder than the air around it, unless you're at like a hot spring. But that's something else. So that means water will get rid of the heat. Classic example. Another one is maybe like sand or dirt, or you might have seen people on TV shows like using a pillow to kind of knock out the flames. That is also literally smothering the fire, getting rid of that oxygen. Now, it doesn't get rid of the heat, which is why water tends to be the go-to. I also want to mention this is for fires that are like traditional wood fires. Didn't say that before. Chemical fires, electrical fires are different. We're talking about like a traditional wood fire. So smothering the flames works really well. We still have this fuel though, right? It's really dangerous usually to remove the fuel because that is what is currently on fire. You don't want to mess with that. Fuel tends to be something called the limiting reactant, if we want to get all technical. All that means is that since we're doing this reaction, something is going to get used up first. One of the ingredients is going to go out first. And if you're just kind of in a forest or just out of home, it's not likely the oxygen is going to get used up. It's not likely there'll be a really massive cold blast of air that comes through. But eventually, when you burn something enough, it's going to become ashy charcoal. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so you can see this better. I look a little something like this. This doesn't really burn very well. Charcoal can burn, but straight up ash, it doesn't burn very well. So the fuel will go out first. And in this kind of a forest, the fuel is what we have to pay the most attention to because the heat will just be what it is. It'll just be whatever the weather is that given day. Today it's supposed to be like 62 degrees. It's a pretty nice day. The oxygen, we're not going to get rid of that. All these plants are emitting oxygen as we speak. They breathe in the carbon dioxide, they breathe out the oxygen. That's not going to go away for just looking at what might happen in a forest if a fire goes through it. The fuel, however, will change. So let's focus in on that when we're thinking about fire in a forest like this one. So looking at these trees behind me right here, the ground's kind of washed out, but I think you can see these all right. Think about their placement. These are pretty close to each other. They're not quite as close as they look because you got a bit of a forced perspective going on here, but they're pretty close to each other. So let's say this one that's like right over here caught fire. So let's just say it's like one of these. If it burns, the fuel's going to go away because that's just what happens. But there's a tree right next door. So the fire can probably just hop right over to this tree and keep it going. Now, if they were super spaced apart, so let's say, for example, we have our campfire pit right here and some wood kind of fell out. You can see, even though it's, kind of washed out right now, there's not really any trees around the campfire pit. It's not likely for that fuel to hop over to one of the trees way back there. That's too far away. So having some distance means it's not likely we're going to have a really big fire or a fire that spreads because the fuel's too far away from each other. We also need to think about where the fuel is in terms of going up. We have some low kind of bushy trees here next to some tall skinny trees. We don't want the fuel to be super close to each other necessarily. going like this because then the fire can climb up to the tops of the trees. It's called ladder fuel. It's better if there's a bit of a gap, some like short plants and some really tall plants with branches that aren't very low. So it's hard for the fire to climb to the tops of the trees. So with all that in mind, let's say we are in a forest like this one. Let's say though that unfortunately we've had a lot of drought. One thing I didn't mention, green is good, brown is bad. Let's see if the camera is going to adjust here with the lighting. All right, doesn't seem to want to, but that's okay. So we have all these lovely green trees right now. We're in an evergreen forest. That means that these trees don't change colors in the fall. They're green year round. Green is good. They're alive. They're full of water. It's not likely they'll burn. Brown is bad. We see a nice big tree with only brown needles. It's dead. It's pretty dry, so it's pretty likely to burn. So let's say we're in a forest and the trees are really packed in and they're really dry because unfortunately there's lots of brown, there's lots of dead trees around. Let's also say it is a hot day. Let's say it's a windy day. So there's lots of oxygen getting mixed around in the system, pushing around the flames. And let's say, unfortunately, someone dropped something flammable or dropped a match, maybe I should say, and a fire got started. Then you might end up with what's called a crown fire. So I want everyone to please make a circle with your hands and then put that circle on top of your head. Crown fires go to the tops of the trees, just like I put a crown on top of your head. Now I want everyone please to knock on your head. Head injuries are notoriously dangerous. That's why you're always supposed to wear a helmet if you're going out on your bicycle, on your scooter, skateboard, what have you. Same goes for fires climbing to the tops of the trees for the crown fires. They are notoriously dangerous for the trees. So we have that question, right? We're now finally getting back to the question. Is fire a friend or foe? This fire is a foe. So I want everyone please to put your thumbs down and say boo. We do not want this fire. These are the ones that tend to make the news because they're so destructive. They're big, they climb up to the tops of the trees, they often kill big swaths of forest, and they often also burn down buildings and threaten lives. We do not want this kind of fire. That being said, remember, I gave you a long list of conditions to make this happen. So let's say instead we have a fire get started. Maybe this time it's a lightning strike. Let's go for something that's a bit more natural. Let's say we're in a forest where the trees are pretty spaced out. Let's say this had some good precipitation. There's been lots of rain recently. Let's say it's a bit of a colder day and it's not very windy. You're going to have something that's more like a surface fire. So everyone please to reach for the ground, touch the ground by your feet. Surface fires are also called ground fires. They stay on the ground of the forest floor. And I want you to knock on your foot. Foot injuries, they can be pretty bad. I've broken my big toe before. It wasn't great, but they're not very likely to overall harm you. Same goes for surface fires. They're not very likely to overall kind of mess with the forests. And in fact, even comparing them to an injury is a disservice because they can be the good fires. I want everyone to go with thumbs up and say, yay! Those are the friend fires. So can fire be a forest friend? Absolutely. So this is what a surface fire looks like. You can see we even have some fire crew all around just kind of hanging out. They're monitoring it, but they're not worried about it. This again is the good kind of fire. It doesn't get to the tops of the trees, very unlikely to destroy anything. We love it. We want those kinds of fire. Here's the thing. I'm going to move us a little bit to kind of show you an example for why we want those kinds of fire. I said it's a friend, but let's go over here and talk a bit more about how it can be a friend. And yes, we do have visitors here today. We are open. Looking over here, this area has not had a fire go through it in a while, this very specific spot. And we can see that we have a big log right there. We have a bunch of these kind of twiggy trees. Now, these are okay. Not every single one of our trees is evergreen. So all these kind of twiggy trees are something called dogwood. You can't quite see it on your side of the screen, but they're just about to start putting out some flowers and leaves for spring. But there's a lot of plant material here, a lot of potential fuel. And that's because in this very specific spot, we haven't had a fire in a very long time. And these kinds of forests with giant sequoias and these evergreen trees, these are called conifers because they have cones. There's usually a fire every about 10 to 15 years. But many of these forests, unfortunately, haven't had a fire in over 100 years. Sometimes it's hundreds of years. So what happened, right? Well, unfortunately, what happened is all the settlers came to California for the gold rush. And more people started coming to California. They did not have the same ideas of fire as, for example, the Native Americans did. And they did not want fire at all. They saw a fire from a lightning strike. They saw a fire started by Native American for something called cultural burning. They said, nope, we don't want it. That's too scary. That's too unknown. We don't want it at all. So fire was actively suppressed. It was not allowed. But fire burns away fuel. So if you don't allow fire, the fuel is going to build and build and build and build and build until we have so much fuel and a lot of plants are growing next to each other when maybe they were more spaced out because there's just more plants that we can have a really big catastrophic fire from all that fuel. Unfortunately, another addition to this is that we're currently experiencing human-caused climate change as we're emitting heat trapping gases. So we're talking like carbon dioxide, things that get emitted from like driving cars that have gasoline. That's making everything warmer and warmer and warmer. Remember, heat was part of that fire triangle. So heat's increasing and fuel has increased because of fire suppression. That's how we can get these really awful fires. And unfortunately, luckily not here, but in other places with giant sequoias, remember maybe Sequoia National Park was on that map? Tens of thousands of giant sequoias have died in fires from about 2015 through 2021. It's really not good. And that's again, partially because of suppression for a very long time, basically since the gold rush, as well as increased temperatures from climate change. Not great. So let's do a boo, please, with your thumbs down. Boo, because those are faux fires. But we're working on it. We're working to bring back those friendly fires, those surface fires. We're doing it to protect the forest, but we're also doing it to actually help our friends, the giant sequoias, right? If we bring back fire, we reduce the fuel, right? So it's less likely to create a huge buildup of fuel to have a huge massive fire. But it also helps out the giant sequoias. They like fire. I mentioned very briefly that giant sequoias are kind of conifer, like all these different evergreen trees are kinds of conifer. Conifers have cones. This is a giant sequoia cone, carries the seeds of the tree. They actually don't start out looking like this. They're all sealed up. So all these little cracks you can see right here, those aren't usually there. They start out green, no cracks. You can see a little bit of green left on this one. But when a fire goes through, not those huge crown fires, the friendly ones, let's everyone please do a thumbs up and a yes. We love those fires. They will release their seeds out of these cracks, which are these itty bitty little guys. Shake one out of my hand here to show you. These itty bitty little seeds will get released. They're very lightweight. Think about like a dandelion that gets pushed around by the wind. They float around in the wind and they'll land in a spot that's recently been cleared out by fire. Giant sequoias love a post-fire habitat to get started. Think about it, right? This tree is really huge. It needs a lot of resources to get this big. And if there's less competition from other plants, then they're going to have more resources. They'll have more space. They'll have more access to the sun, which is really key for them. Giant sequoias love the sun. Less competition for water. These can be very thirsty trees. And right now on the ground, we have some bits of bark. We have some needles. These are giant sequoia needles. This is not great soil. This does not give seeds all these awesome nutrients that they need. But when it's burned, not too hot, when it's burned just the right temperature, it's basically like a faster decomposition. It's a faster way to put nutrients back in the soil than like mushrooms or insects would do. So it gives them really nice soil to grow. And in places that just had a fire, and this is, without us doing anything, we see a bunch of baby giant sequoias. So here's some baby giant sequoias in a place that was burned. These guys are about 6 months old. Happy little guys. Now I've been talking about, bringing back fire and burning. I'm talking about something very specific in this part when I'm saying we're bringing back fire. Talking about prescribed burns. I want everyone please to give me a heart emoji. Who here has heard of prescribed burns? Or you can just raise your hand if you're in your classroom setting. And it's okay if you haven't heard of it. This is just my way to kind of see who's heard what so far. All right, I'm seeing some hearts. This is a very specific term because the idea is that we're bringing back fire just like how a doctor might be prescribing medicine. It's a very specific method to make sure it's nice and safe. A doctor is supposed to check in on you, see how you're feeling, figure out what the problem is, figure out how to fix the problem, give you the right medicine at the right dosage. You need to take it at a very specific time, a very specific way. And a prescribed burn, our forest doctors, our foresters, look out of the forest and say, okay, this spot hasn't been burned in 100 years, 150 years. Maybe it's more like 30 years. But we know this usually is burned every about 10 to 15 years. We got to go in there and burn it ourselves. But we got to make sure it's safe. So they check the weather. Is it too hot? We talked about how heat could be a problem. Is it too windy? Same thing. Heat could cause some issues. Is it too wet? Is there just no point to burn because nothing's going to burn anyway because everything's covered in water? They check all those boxes. They make sure there's lots of water available. They make what's called fuel breaks. So they make sure there's lots of space between the fuel. We talked about that too. So it's only burned where they want it to burn, how they want it to burn. I can't stress enough how regulated this is. It can take a very long time to do prescribed burn because so many boxes have to be checked. And all this is done, well, it's a team effort, I should say, but it's headed by a burn boss. That is his official title. You can be a burn boss if you want to. This is Ben. He's our burn boss, and he is the giant sequoia expert at prescribed burns. This could be you if you're interested in burning things in a very safe and positive way. This spot behind you right here, I mentioned hasn't been burned. That's a very specific part of the park. Basically, the entire rest of this area, this is called the North Grove, has been burned, as well as another part of the park with giant sequoias called the South Grove. And these were really big deals. And we're seeing a bunch of baby giant sequoias coming out of them, like the picture I showed you, because giant sequoias like this. And this also means that it's less likely we'll have a really big, huge burn because we're bringing back fires. So let's do another yay, yes, thumbs up for fire, because this one can be a forest friend. And interestingly enough, it's a forest friend partially because it'll make sure that we don't have that forest faux fire. So I have one last message for you all. If you see that there's a prescribed burn happening in your area, I'd love you to tell the people you know, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell your family, hey, this is a good thing. I know the smoke is really annoying. Trust me, I've lived through a few years worth of prescribed burns in the park where I've had to deal with the smoke. Wear your mask, be nice and safe about it. But this is a net benefit. We need to bring the forest back into what they're used to when it comes to fire. It reduces our fire risk. And hey, it might help out your local plants, just like how fire can help out the giant sequoias here. So please spread the good word, prescribe burns. And I want to thank you all for joining me. If you had to leave and then come back later, this was live streamed to YouTube. So you can go to the California State Park Sports YouTube channel, click on the live tab, and that's where this program will show up. Now, I'll be lingering for any questions if you guys have to get going. Again, thanks again. And I hope you all have a wonderful Earth Week. And make sure to check out the other portscasts going on this week because there's a bunch of good things going on. All right, let me dive into the chat or to the Q&A. If you've been holding on to your question until then, now's the time to do it. I am starting at the bottom and going my way to the top. So I'm looking at most recently asked questions first. Okay, I see a question. How many trees are in the park? So giant sequoias specifically, we have about 1,200 giant sequoia trees. Overall trees, tens of thousands. We have lots of different kinds of trees here besides giant sequoias. I don't think anyone has counted every single one of them. I also see a question for how warm is it right now? I think I already mentioned that. Right now it's like 62 degrees. In wintertime, we get a fair bit of snow, so 30s. Summertime, we can be in the 80s. Unfortunately, this past summer, we were fairly regularly in the 90s, which is a bit new, but that's part of the climate change component. Can you ride bikes? You can ride bikes in designated areas in the park. There's places that are paved roads and there's places that are fire roads. Those are big, wide spaces where you can ride your bike, but our trails are too narrow for bikes otherwise. Where is the biggest sequoia located? So that is called the General Sherman tree, and it's found in Sequoia National Park. We don't have any of the top like 25 biggest giant sequoias, but ours are still very large. Just almost all the really huge ones are found in Sequoia National Park. Okay, I have questions about the founder of the state park. So for this particular park, people are actually trying to make it a state park well, actually, people are trying to make this a national park as far back as the 1870s. So this was actually before the national parks were really a thing, but it didn't quite go through. The president didn't sign off on it. But there have been various nonprofit groups along the way. The Calaveras Grove Association is a really big one that eventually got to the point where it could become a state park in 1931. But it was a big group effort. Lots of different outside entities came together, tried to make this a state park. Before that, again, they tried to make it a national park. Famous people like John Muir were involved in that first attempt. All right, see a question about holes in the tree and a question about animals. So I can kind of do two questions answered at once. So this particular tree can't really see holes in it right now. So I'm going to move us away from this giant sequoia and show you another tree called an incense cedar. This one has a bunch of holes in it. Hopefully the lighting's okay. Apologies for the lighting today. It's really hard to deal with a bright sunshiny day. We have all these giant holes right here. These are caused by woodpeckers. We have a ton of woodpeckers that live in this forest. They love all these different kinds of the conifer trees, and they will find insects in here. If it's an acorn woodpecker, they will store acorns in a tree like this. They're all over the place. We also have lots of different kinds of squirrels. I'm not sure if you saw any over the screen, but they've been pretty active in the spring as they're kind of getting back into the rhythm of actively eating after doing their mini hibernations. We have bears, we have foxes, we have different kinds of owls, coyotes, snakes. We have a river, so we have some fish, lots of different kinds of insects, deer. Am I missing anything major? That's kind of like the highlights. Lots of different kinds of songbirds. We're actually a pretty popular place for people who are into birding, besides seeing the giant sequoias, of course. Ooh, gosh, there's so many questions. I'll try to get to as many as I can, but I will have to stop at 12. Okay, see a couple questions kind of related to tree height and being able to survive. So I'll get into that a little bit. As long as kind of asking clarifying questions for fire at the tops of the trees. So if you think about it, let's go with people-caused fires, because unfortunately those are most fires that happen in California and across the United States are human caused. Usually not deliberate, just someone not really understanding how to be safe with fire. So let's say it was a human caused fire. Let's say someone was unfortunately starting their own fire in like this patch over here. They weren't being safe and doing it in a fire ring. The fire is pretty low then, because the start on the ground is going to stay on the ground. The only way it can climb up to top of the tree is with the ladder fuel. So remember I mentioned that before. If there's like a low kind of bushy plant, like maybe one of these dogwoods right here, these right now are pretty isolated. They're not right next to a tree with low branches. If this giant sequoia had a bunch of low branches that are really close to these dogwood, and let's say it was like really close like this, they could use the branches to climb up to get to, they meaning the fire, can use the branches to climb up to get to the top of the tree. Now you might notice this giant sequoia doesn't have low branches. Giant sequoias have a few different fire adaptations. I didn't really have time to get into them. I was kind of hoping someone would ask, which is great. One of the adaptations to survive fire is to make sure, as best they can, a fire doesn't become a crown fire. So they don't tend to have low branches. So they don't tend to have ladder fuel for the fire to get to the tops of their trees. Now, obviously, that can still happen if it's a really windy day, if it's a really packed in forest, lots of dry fuel, that'd be a problem. Someone asked how trees can survive without water. You can kind of think about how like people can survive without water, but only for a limited period of time. You might get sick, you might get dehydrated, but you might survive, let's say, 2 days without water, but that's a problem. Trees live a very, very long time, so they're not limited to 2 days. For example, giant sequoias can live over 3,200 years. So that's like before the Roman Empire. Some trees are that old. Pretty crazy. But because they live that long, they can survive maybe a few years with not much water. But eventually it's going to get to the point where they're going to get really sick, just like how you would get really sick if you were dehydrated. And maybe they can't survive even a surface fire. Maybe they can't survive the usual insects that live on them. Maybe they can't survive some other disease that goes through the forest. Or maybe it's just so dehydrated that they're done. So they can't survive for very long without water, but keep in mind their idea of time is very different from ours because they live so long. So one thing I didn't really directly mention, but I said that lots of fires are getting worse because increased heat from climate change. A lot of fires are also getting worse because climate change is shaking up our weather patterns. In places that would get a ton of rain very regularly at certain times, the rain's happening later, too much, not at all. Things are shifting. So fires can be worse because of drought, and there's more likely to have drought here with climate change. Not great. That's why we're doing prescribed burns. We've got to try to lessen that fuel load. Okay, I can maybe do two more. Hopefully that answered like 3 or 4 questions I saw in the chat. Some more people are asking about bears, now to mention them. There are bears right now for sure. I personally haven't seen a bear in the park. Well, actually, I saw one in October, but that was out kind of in the outskirts of the park. But in like a public space of the park, I haven't seen a bear here in about 2.5 years. So they are around. I know they're around. I just personally have very bad luck in actually seeing them in public areas. But most people don't have to worry about bears here. They're here, but they're still scared of people, which is good. All right, I'll see some questions about the tallest trees. So giant sequoias are not the tallest trees ever. That's the coast redwood, direct relative of the giant sequoia. Sometimes giant sequoias are called Sierra redwoods, basically siblings. Coast redwood, the very tallest one, is about 370 feet tall. Very impressive. They said giant sequoia is the very tallest one ever, it's 314 feet, but that's like a basketball player. Coast redwoods have giant sequoias feet for height. Giant sequoias are just overall bigger because they're wider. Okay, let's see. Some people are asking how long does it take the tree to get so big? So I mentioned they can live over 3,000 years, which is pretty wild. It doesn't take that long for them to get huge. If there's a drought year, they'll pause. So they won't be actively growing if there's not enough water. But if there's enough water very consistently, giant sequoias can grow 2 feet up and 1 inch out in a year. So they can grow pretty fast, but that's like ideal conditions. There's enough water, there's enough of everything else. Okay, I see a couple more questions kind of ask me to clarify giant sequoias surviving fire. We'll end with that. So I mentioned that they really like fire for their babies, right? They do still need to be able to survive the fire. They have the branches way up near the tops of the trees. That helps a lot. But they also have very thick bark. Bark is overall the protective layer of any tree, right? But their bark can be 2 feet thick. So that would mean giant sequoia bark would stretch the entire length of my arm. That's super thick. If you've ever tossed log onto a fire before, you know that it would take a long time to burn through 2 feet of wood. So let's say a fire goes through 1 year and the next year goes through 15 years later, the tree will have grown back some of the bark. Maybe not all of it, but that's okay because going through 2 feet of wood can take a really, really long time. That helps them out a bunch. Also, the bark of a giant sequoia, it can burn for sure. We do see lots of burn scars on giant sequoias. That's just natural. Once they get to be, however many thousands of years old, they're going to experience a bunch of fire. So there will be some burn scars, but it just doesn't burn that well compared to other trees. I'm going to show you a video real quick to kind of end this session. And again, it probably is going to be a little bit laggy. This is also on the Calaveras Big Trees YouTube channel if you're curious. This tree, as you can see, has an absolutely ginormous burn scar. It goes all the way through the tree. And if you were to stand in the middle and look up, you could actually see the sky. This tree was so badly burned. So this tree, we don't know how old it is because the way to measure the age of the tree is to count the tree rings. That's gone. We have no idea how old this tree is. It's got to be at least 2,000 years old with how much fire it's experienced. And yet, this tree is still alive. So we're going to go all the way to the top and we're going to see if it has green is good, remember that, or brown is bad with its needles. I'm seeing green is good. This tree is dead. You can see the brown needles. Nice, big, puffy green. This giant sequoia is okay. So giant sequoias also can just survive a bunch of fires because they're so big. Think about like a football player can absorb a lot of impact from people, slamming into them time after time. Eventually, there's going to be too many, and the football player has to retire. Same goes for giant sequoias. But because they're so huge, they can just last far more fires than many other trees. Even with all their defenses, eventually it's going to get to be too much and they'll, die. They don't live forever. But because they're so huge, they can survive a bunch of them. Okay, y'all, I know I didn't get every single question that was there. I'm going to share my screen one last time real quick. If you're dying for me to answer your question, I didn't get to you. I had literally over 100 questions in the chat. So thank you for being very active. I was trying to pick out some of the repeats that I saw. You can send an email to calaverasbigtrees@ports-ca.us. I'll leave this up just for a little bit. You can send me an email. I don't regularly do ports programs anymore, unfortunately. That's just kind of a general job thing, but I'm always happy to answer emails with questions about what's going on here. So thank you all so much for joining me and for hanging out to get some questions answered. That was a proper 15 minutes worth of questions. I love curious minds. And if you do happen to come to Calaveras Big Trees, again, my name is Lily. You can ask if Ms. Lily, if Ranger Lily, if Interpreter Lily, any of those works for me, is around. I'd love to come by to say hi. Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.